This was an odd one. I played this very badly, but it still ended up in my win on time, and even if it wasn't on time, I still would have been the winner. This was a 44 move game. It was a 10-minute rapid, just like yesterday. So I start off as white because I'm always lucky, and I always get started off white. And I start off with my usual opening, and so he matches that by mirroring the knight. I got to go with my D pawn. He does as well, but he only moves it up one space, and so I threaten his knight on the C file, and he moves that over to E. And so I threaten it with my bishop, and he, interestingly enough, moves it to C4. So he's playing extremely aggressively with this knight. I threaten it with B file pawn, and he moves right here, trying to threaten the queen. This is a terrible blunder, as I simply move right here, and he has nowhere else to go to save that knight. He matches that by threatening my bishop, trying to make into a trade, but I simply pull that back. And so after a while of thinking, he takes his queen over to the H file on H4. I take his trapped knight, and so he moves his bishop, threatening the E pawn for whatever reason. So I move a pawn up and threaten his queen, and so he pulls that back. I threaten again with my knight, and he pushes that down to threaten the knight. So I push up my pawn, now threatening this bishop, as well as threatening the queen if he decides to take the knight. So he pulls his bishop back, and so I move my G pawn up once again, now forking both the queen and the bishop. He makes the proper move of taking, so I take back, and then he takes the pawn. From here, things are going to get bad for me, because as soon as I move this bishop right here, he takes, and suddenly this rook is under siege. So I move my knight to protect it. He can't take any pieces here because it would result in his queen being taken, so he decides to settle for the pawn that was hanging on the D file. At this point, it's pretty even, I believe, and so I threaten with my rook. He moves and puts in check. I move up my C pawn. He starts pushing his center pawns. I threaten his queen, and he moves down one, threatening the rook. And so I take this open pawn, and he threatens my rook. From here, I take the pawn on the E file, putting him in check. He moves his king over to the D file, now disallowing him castle. I check with my queen, and he protects with his knight. I check with my bishop, and then this is obviously a blunder because now he has forked my rook and my bishop. So I simply have to take and put him in check. And obviously he's going to take with his pawn, and I'm going to threaten this pawn here because he cannot move this knight to take back because it is pinned by the queen. So he moves his pawn down. I take with my rook. He moves and threatens it with the bishop, and so I move up threatening the bishop, and he takes pawn here. I take pawn on B file. He still can't take anything. So he takes with his black bishop instead. I put him in check. He moves out of the way. I move my rook down here because he has pinned my my queen, because he's protecting the king. So I move this right here. So if he takes it, I take a queen, and if he, well, not necessarily because it would put me in check, so I would have to take. So it just makes things more even. He makes a blunder and brings his rook out, so I go ahead and take with my queen, and now his queen is in jeopardy. He moves a pawn down, interestingly enough, so I capture his rook on the D file, putting him in check. He takes back, and I make the trade, so I'm no longer in jeopardy, and he played that terribly. And so he takes queen. From here, I start to move my pieces up. It's obvious he wants to put me in check to take the rook, so I move my rook right here so that it can be re-intercepted by the knight. He does, so I move it, he takes, I take, and now he has 3 pawns and I am up 2 pieces. So at this point, it's all a matter of pushing up the pawns. Unfortunately, he runs out of time, and I just go ahead and check him, and at this point, it would be mate in 5 had the match continued, but he ran out of time, thus giving